Hello, this is Greg from SharePoint Maven, and in today's video, I would like to explain to you how you can do column validations in SharePoint lists and libraries. What is column validation? Well, column validation essentially allows you to make sure that the data entered into a particular column meets certain criteria. Now, there are actually two types of column validation that we have. There is a column validation, and there is what I call list or library validation. Let me explain to you the difference between the two. Column validation essentially ensures that the data you entered into the column meets certain criteria. For example, let's say I create a renewal date column on the policy library. I want to make sure that when somebody enters the date, somebody enters a future date. It cannot be a date in the past. That would be a column validation. On another hand, if let's say I want to create a renewal date, a renewal policy date column, and I want the user to populate the data, I also want to make sure that the date is prior to the expiration date, right? So I now want to compare that enter date against another column. At this point, we would need to use the list or library validation, right? So when you just want to validate a single column, it's column validation. When you want to compare the data against other columns, at that point, it would be a validation on the whole list or library. All right, so let's use this example, essentially the examples I have given you. Let's build the columns together, and let me show you how to set up the column validation. Now, the functionality I'm going to show you works on both SharePoint lists and libraries. For this particular example, I'm going to utilize it on a document library. All right, so here we go. I have this SharePoint document library with a bunch of policies and an expiration date already filled in. I'm going to create a column called renewal date. All right, so here we go. It's a date field. Perfect. And normally you just click save, but now we want to perform some validation. Essentially, I want to make sure that the date entered is in the future. It cannot be in the past. So under more options, column validation. This is where you specify the formula for that particular column. And here's the formula we're going to use. Essentially, the renewal date has to be bigger than today. All right, so this is the formula. All right, and this is where we can specify the user message. Essentially, in case if this fails, what will the user see? What will be the error message? I guess the user will see. We can say date must be in future. All right, here we go. So we just did this. Let's go ahead and test it out. So I'm going to tag one of the policies. Here we go. Perfect. And this is the renewal date that I have to fill it in. Now, this is when I'm recording this video on August 16, 2020. So let's go ahead and choose a date that is in the future. Perfect. So obviously everything works. Now let me choose a date for another document that's in the past. Here we go. All right, doesn't really matter. Perfect. Look at this. This is the error message that the user gets when validation happens. All right. So what I just showed you is the column validation. All right, a single column validation. Now, a big limitation, I guess, of this method is that we cannot reference other columns when we do the single column validation. All right. In this case, what we need to do what's called a list or library validation. So let me show you how to do that. So for that second scenario, what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that when the user enters the renewal date, essentially it has to be prior to the expiration date. All right, so it has to be prior to the expiration date. All right, if it's in the future, if it's past the expiration date, obviously it doesn't make sense. Users should not enter those dates. All right, so let me show you how to set it up. At this point, you need to go to the library settings. Now, again, if you try to reference the another column in this single column validation, just like I showed you, it will actually give you an error message. You can try it for yourself, but let's not waste time. Let me show you how to set up library level validation. So gear icon, library settings, validation settings, all right? And this is where you enter the formula, and we actually have the assistance here of this area on the right, where we can actually pick and choose the columns we want. So we want the renewal date, you just literally double click on this, to be less than expiration date, all right? Perfect. And we can, of course, supply the user message as well, but pretty much we're done right now. So let's go ahead and test it out. So for this particular policy, all right, for this particular document, actually, let's pick this one. So it would be easier to show you. So we have October 3rd, 2020 expiration date. If I enter the date prior to that, it will work. If I enter the date past the expiration date, it should not work. So let's go ahead and test it out. Here we go. So I'm going to, and remember, right, I mean, it has to be the future date as well anyway. So let's go ahead and, choose something just a few days prior. All right, so October 1st. Perfect, it goes through. All right. At the same time, let me choose another document over here. And again, I'm going to choose, so that's December 1st, 2020. I'm going to choose something past that, all right? So let's choose a date just a few days after that. Okay, you see it doesn't actually fill anything out. You see it doesn't actually save. And essentially we encountered the validation error, so it did not even accept the answer. Essentially our formula worked. All right, so that's essentially the list of library validation. Remember, if you just want to validate the data in a single column, just to want to make sure it was entered correctly, you would need to use the column validation. But the big limitation of that method is that you cannot reference other columns. So when you do need to reference the other columns, you would need to use the list of library validation, behind the scenes when you go to list of library settings. And that's where you can obviously reference the other columns, right? So that's all I wanted to show you in this particular video. Hopefully you learned something new. As always, happy to see you on my blog, SharePointMaven.com, as well as my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.